Welcome to Chatter Tea, home of the Sipping Tea podcast. We welcome you to our community. We welcome you to our conversations. This is a safe space for us to remember the dreams of Dr. Martin Luther King and to collaborate and collectively come together and work on ways to come to unity, brotherhood, and sisterhood in the Black community. It's much needed. It's time for us to reimagine our potential and understand that we are being deceived by our mutual enemy, and we are being used in this game of racial warfare as pawns to be turned against each other. And it's time that we wake up and we've realized Dr. King's message to us that we need to come together in unity and love. Let's take a look at how the police departments across America play a huge part in the systemic racism and oppression of Black people. Let's take a look at how the police department have themselves replaced old day lynchings to modern day police brutality and have made it a way of life that Black people live in fear.
Negro. Today they have taken off the white sheet and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing.
So what does police brutality stem from, and how does the system allow for it to continue?
Because of slavery, there is this unbroken thread between the ownership of Black bodies. And for slavery to exist as long as it did in this country, there had to be a dehumanization of Black people. And you see the remnants of that dehumanization happening today and playing out in the way that law enforcement interacts with Black and brown individuals.
The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution abolished slavery in 1865, but hostility far from disappeared as Black people were freed.
The early Joint Reconstruction Committee that looked at, examined what was going on in this nation in the wake of the Civil War, called for testimony of Union officials, of leadership, individuals that were in the South, and asked what was going on in the South, what was going on to the newly freed formerly enslaved Black people. And the reports were that Black people were getting murdered with impunity, were getting violated and assaulted, raped with impunity. And so the 14th Amendment, which was passed shortly after that Joint Reconstruction Committee, was passed in part to provide equal protection of the laws, redress to Black victims of crime. And here we are today with Black individuals whose lives are ended because of the stain of slavery.
According to Leonard Moore, an American history professor at the University of Texas,
a key factor explaining the predominance of African Americans among victims of police brutality is anti-Black racism among members of mostly white police departments.
He explains that police aggression intensified after World War II. Following the victory of Allied forces, Black Americans started demanding formal rights. They had, after all, fought on the front lines for the U.S. in battle, though they were kept in segregated units. Meanwhile, as white Americans moved into urban areas,
police brutality replaced lynchings as a means of oppressing Black people.
In the 1970s, African Americans started joining the police force through affirmative action programs.
But some of them themselves committed serious acts of brutality against African American civilians, in part because they wished to be seen as good cops and to be otherwise accepted within their departments.
The rise in urban crime rates was used to link African Americans to criminality.
I spent much of my career before coming to academia as a capital post-conviction lawyer. So I was reviewing transcripts from prior trial proceedings. And often, prosecutors in their opening statements, in their closing statements, would refer to Black defendants using dehumanizing language. That the defendant was circling, hunting, stalking the victim. Who hunts, stalks, and circles a victim? An animal. And there are studies showing that particularly Black defendants, particularly Black male defendants, are routinely referred to using dehumanizing, animalistic, racially coded language, because there is this equation that Black and brown skin is equated with criminality, is equated with dangerousness.
From the 1960s onwards, police brutality began sparking race riots across the United States. The Harlem Riot broke out in 1964 after the killing of a Black teenager by police. Then there were the Watt riots of 1965 and the Detroit riot of 1967. The killing of an unarmed African American caused riots in 1980 in the Liberty City section of Miami. And the police beating of Rodney King, followed by the acquittal of the officers involved, triggered the Los Angeles race riots of 1992. In 2014, demonstrations spanned the country after the police killings of Eric Garner in New York and teenager Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, both of which were followed by decisions not to indict the officers involved. And the National Guard was deployed to Ferguson to quell the riots there. The Black Lives Matter movement, which was founded the year before, started to increase its visibility. Peaceful demonstrations and riots followed the death of Freddie Gray in police custody in Baltimore in 2015. Which brings us to the current murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, which has resulted in the deployment of the National Guard to major cities across the United States and sparked worldwide demonstrations. There remain countless similar incidents that have escaped widespread media and public attention.
I worked with the Ottawa Police Service for over 30 years. I had a Fulbright visiting researcher fellowship at the University at Albany, just outside of New York City. My first impression of spending time there was race is a much bigger topic of conversation in American society than Canadian, much more profound. Pretty much every conversation was somehow race was involved. One of the things that's hanging on the walls of almost every briefing room is a giant poster that has the pictures of known gang members on it. At the Buffalo Police, at one of the districts, there was a giant poster. There was probably 100 pictures on the poster with people's names on them. There wasn't one white-skinned person on the whole poster. And so if this is what an officer sees every single day when they go to work and they sit in their chair for briefing and they look at the poster and they equate in their brain gang member, dangerous, drug dealers, weapons, and 100 black faces. You know, there's a process of socialization. If an officer has a coach officer that is racially biased, they're going to be impregnating those views in a young, impressionable officer. And that's how I think, unfortunately, these things develop in policing.
This type of bias often goes on to spread among society at large. Muhammad Light experienced such profiling just last week after a LinkedIn post went viral by a man named Gene Smith, who said that Light and his fellow black Harvard Law School classmates posing for a class of 2021 photo looked like gang members. Light's comment on the post also went viral.
As always, we hope you enjoy sipping tea with us today. As you just saw in this video, the history of the police department, which actually started again as the Slave Patrol, and they still operate as the Slave Patrol, they need to be really taking a serious look at. The whole organization needs to be restructured, maybe defunded, dismantled, whatever. But what we have now is not working. And some officers and a large percentage of the police department still feel it's okay to not protect or respect the humanity of black people. Please remember to like, comment, and share. And we want you to remember to always love yourselves, and let's learn how to love each other.